It's difficult to believe in 1925 this location could make a claim as a World Heritage Site just 20 years later. But during the Great Depression from 1927 to 1934, Southampton was engaged in a massive building project involving the reclamation of a body of water stretching from the Royal Pier to Millbrook Point called West Bay that led to the creation of the Western or New Docks. These were needed because of the increased traffic in the port and the size of ships which needed berths. During the start of World War II, the town suffered badly from the Blitz and the port was closed for 2 years. The government was so concerned at the response that it sent Wing Commander Hodsall to investigate, and his report was not complimentary. Even so, Southampton was chosen as the chief supply and troop movement centre for the US armies, despite the doubts of the British High Command, making the port the springboard for Operation Overlord and the conduit for material and men needed for the Second Front in northwestern Europe. Southampton is the only port in the British Isles with a double high tide that means landing craft and troop ships could be loaded at any time of the tide. This would be vital to returning skippers who could not wait for the changing tide when the speed of the crossing of the channel was the difference of life and death to the men on the beaches. From February 1944 to the middle of May, the port was mainly occupied with the unloading of US Army cargo, which arrived in Liberty ships and other vessels under the command of the United States Maritime Commission. Such was the activity that Southampton was the busiest port in the UK and the third in the world, which as far as the British authorities were concerned was a remarkable turnaround. After May 44, the port was shut to all incoming US Bolero cargo and unloading throttled back to allow preparations for D-Day. This included the construction of the concrete breakwaters for the Mulberry Harbour, converting merchant ships into block ships, and making raft barges from telegraph poles. There was also a considerable amount of preloading. 194 barges with fuel and munitions, as well as large stores of quartermaster supplies, were loaded, anchored in the inlets and rivers of the Solent, waiting for D-Day. The invasion schedule called for the loading of motor transports, coasters and tanks. 7 motor transport vessels every day, which was increased to 12. Each of the transports, which were formerly Liberty ships, could accommodate 500 men and 120 vehicles. Despite exhaustive preparations, loading tables from the staging areas and transit camps were to prove wildly inaccurate, with a problem eventually solved at the American end by leaving the planning until the arrival of units, when the number and types of vehicles could be confirmed visually. According to the eyewitness account of a shunter operating the locomotives in the Western Docks during Operation Overlord, there were numbers of trains with petrol jerry cans that had to be moved from the sidings and loaded onto pallets and hoisted on board the ships at berths 107 and 108. 101 berth and 102 berth handled ammunition. Quartermaster stores such as large tents, Nissen huts, picks, shovels were moved from berth 103 to berth 106. Whenever a hospital train was due to arrive at the Eastern Docks, the dock shunters from the Western Docks would have to pull these trains out of the sheds and over the town quay, threading their way through pedestrian and motor traffic amidst bomb-damaged buildings. If you had time for a meal, there was the Dockers' Canteen, where the food was basic but filling, or the government-run British restaurant serving wartime meals, which was on a bomb site in the High Street above Bar. Some of the first casualties to arrive from Normandy were the American Rangers, who had taken awful punishment and lost a lot of men on Omaha Beach. Instead of being emptied, the landing craft started coming back full of German POWs, German prisoners of war, who were marched to a compound of huts surrounded by barbed wire, which was used by the Allied troops days before D-Day. When the POWs were deloused, they were loaded back onto trains to be taken to Kempton Park Racecourse, with a military escort to await dispersal to proper POW camps. As well as the military, there were the civilians to deal with within the docks, traders who needed their wagons to come and go. Hibberts had wagons full of lager from Alloa in Scotland. it was bottled and ready to go on to ships. Cadbury's had ship's chocolate and cocoa arriving daily. There was Rank's flour mill and Myers timber merchant supplies, plus a constant supply of coal. Given the importance of the port on D-Day, one explanation for the lack of recognition is the trouble experienced at the beginning of the war, which resonated much later and is even blamed for the fact that the town had to wait until the 60s to get city status. A kinder explanation may be found in the report made by the Commander-in-Chief of Operation Neptune, Admiral Ramsay, who said, "Because in the event the movements of over 5,000 ships and craft proceeded smoothly and to plan, and because despite bad weather the Allied armies and air forces were landed and reinforced, if not quite as quickly as the optimum planning figure, at least more quickly than the enemy reinforced his forces by land, it may now appear that the size and complexity of the naval problem was somewhat exaggerated." This was not the case. That the operation proceeded smoothly and according to plan was the result of the hard work and foresight of the many thousands concerned in its preparation, and of the determination and courage of the tens of thousands in the Allied navies and merchant fleets who carried out their orders in accordance with the very highest traditions of the sea.